Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And we are going to be looking through that portal today to go back over 100 years, almost 130, 140 years, to go back into life of one of the great football innovators that's still celebrated today. And his name is very much associated with the game of football. And we have his biographer, a friend of the show who's been on with us before, Jeff Miller. Jeff, welcome to the Pig Pen.
Thanks for having me, Darren. Glad to be here.
Yeah, Jeff, you had this book you wrote probably, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago, maybe longer than that I just discovered recently, and I've been in touch with you about it as I've been reading it and enjoying it, on Glenn Pop Warner, the great coach and innovator of the game, one of the people that I hold in high regards of making football what it is today.
Mhm.
And I guess, Jeff, what was sort of your inspiration for writing a biography about Pop Warner?
I'm from Springville, which is Pop's hometown, and I was doing a book signing event here in Springville on a Buffalo Bills book that I had written, and in the audience just happened to be my third grade teacher. Now, this is, I'm 61 now, so I mean, we're talking, this is 50 years beyond, or whatever, third grade, but she happened to be there, and she was one of my favorite teachers, actually. And she now lives in Springville also. And after this presentation, she came up to me and she said, no one's ever written anything about Pop Warner. And I just looked at her. I'm like, well, I'm a professional. I read about professional football. And she goes, yeah, but somebody really should do something about Pop Warner. He's our most famous citizen, and somebody should do something. So, I kind of filed it away as, just like, okay, she's she's out of her mind. I just didn't. I never really thought about writing about Pop Warner. But the more I thought about it, I walk around town, and he just happens to be buried about 500 yards from where I live. And it just seemed like, the stars were aligning, and I was meant to do this. So I at one point, I can't remember when, I just decided, you know what, maybe his story needs to be told. And I had just written, or just read, a biography of John Heisman, and I thought, man, somebody should tell Pop Warner's story. He's more famous than John Heisman. Yeah, there's the Heisman Trophy, but there's Pop Warner Little League football. I mean, this is everywhere. Every town has a Little League football team, and it's named after Pop Warner. So I thought, okay. So I just decided to write it, and it's turned out to be a pretty big thing around here. The Springville is a small town. We don't have a lot of famous people who come from here. So a biography of Pop Warner was well received. And yeah, I think that as we were talking before we went on the air, that there wasn't a lot of information in this town about Pop, because all of his coaching career was outside of the state. He coached at Cornell, he coached at Carlisle, he coached at Stanford, Temple, Pitt. So all of his papers are spread far and wide. There's nothing really here on Pop in terms of archives. So a lot of the research was done online. And but I think that I was able to bring enough research and information together to make a really credible biography of him, and make the town of Springville proud, and be able to say, yeah, this is our guy.
Yeah, as a person that's read the book, you definitely made your town very proud by the way
Thank
you
you.
did. You really represented Pop Warner's story very well. The good, the bad, and everything in between.
Yeah.
Mostly good, but you even shadowed some of his skeletons that he might have had in his life too, which is part of who he was and
Right.
part of his character. And you got to understand the era he lived in too. He started coaching in the late 1890s or mid
Yeah.
1890s.
Yeah. He
And
started coaching at Iowa in the late 1890s. He was coaching two colleges at the same time, which is kind of weird. But he accepted an offer from the University of Iowa to coach, and at the same time, he accepted an offer from another college. And he thought, well, what I'll do is I'll go up to Iowa for a month, I'll set up a system that I like. I'll get the captain of the team to be my assistant coach, and then I'll move on to Georgia and the University of Georgia, and then I can communicate by telegram with the coach back in Iowa. They'll run my system, and so basically I'll get credit for two colleges. And so he did that for a couple of years, and he did so pretty successfully. So
Yeah, I love the one part in the book where you said, I think when he was told Georgia, University of Georgia, because he got that job second, they offered him quite a bit more money than Iowa did. And he told Georgia, he said, hey, I can't get there until, September 17th or whatever the date was, sometime later in September. And, they bought it and said, oh, yeah. And they gave him a raise, I think, by saying, hey, yeah, we want you.
We just need somebody.
Right. Yeah, that different era, different times. And so again, let's take a step back from that before his coaching. How did Pop get involved with the game of football?
Well, Pop played. He never played high school football, even though the football field at Springville Griffith Institute, which is our local high school here, the football field is named Pop Warner Field, but he never played there. He grew up playing like a pickup type of football game, and they would play with a pig's bladder that was blown up and sealed off at both ends, so it would mimic the size of or the shape of a football. But he never had an actual football when he was a kid. His favorite sport was baseball. But when he went to Cornell, when he was on his way there to go to college, he ran into a guy who just happened to be the coach of the Cornell football team. And Pop was a big guy. He was like 6'2", 200 and some odd pounds. And the coach said to him, you should come out for the football team. You ever play before? And he said, no, but I think I can handle it. And so he went out that day, and when he got there, he went out for the football team, and they made him a guard. And because he was actually older than anybody else on the team, somebody at one point called him Pop, for being so old, and the nickname stuck.
This is at Cornell. Wow, yeah. It's interesting. I found it was even interesting how he ended up attending Cornell, because you describe in the book how his family, originally in Springville, they decided to pack up and become ranchers or something for some kind of farming, agricultural down in Texas, quite a distance from Springville, New York, which is a little bit south of Buffalo. But it was interesting. If you could maybe share that little tale of how Pop came home and what transpired there.
Sure. Pop came home at one point because his family had gone to Texas, but he came home for a visit. And while he was here, he went to the racetrack in Buffalo. And when he was there, he won a lot of money. And he thought, I have a system. I can do this. I can make a living, gambling. And when he went back, he ended up losing money, and then he lost more money, and he eventually lost all of his money. And he wired his father that he needed more money. And when he did that, he said, I better have a good reason for needing more money. My father gave me a sufficient amount of money, so he's going to want to know what happened to it. So he told his father he needed the money for tuition to go to school. And he wasn't really planning on going to school. But when his father sent him the money, he I guess he had second thoughts, and he decided, well, I better tell the truth and go to school. So he wound up applying at Cornell, got accepted, and went off to law school. In those days, you didn't have to have great grades in high school or anything, I guess. You could just apply. If you had the money, you went to law school. And that's what he did. He went to Cornell to study to be a lawyer, which he actually did, and actually did pass the bar and became a lawyer. But football kind of took him down another road. So, he went to Cornell mainly because he had to save face, because otherwise he'd have to tell his dad the truth that he lost all his money gambling.
Yeah, that would have been a tough conversation to have with your father. You spend all his money having a good time back home.
Right.
So that's a pretty interesting story. Okay, so he's at Cornell. He's getting his first real taste of organized football from what you're saying. And how did that go? How did he do as a player?
He did pretty well. He felt if he would have had formal training, or at least played at high school, had coaching, that he could have been an All-American. And some people, that might sound braggadocious, but he was a shrewd judge of football material. So I think that he kind of knew that he had the ability, but he just never had the training. He played there for 2 years, and he played well enough to be captain one year, and also to be asked to be a coach after his playing career. So he must have done pretty well and made a name for himself as a player. He was a guard. He was innovative even when he was a player. As a lineman, he had coached but he took over running the team one game, and he inserted one of his own plays, which was a guard around, as opposed to an end around. It was a guard around play, and of course it went to him. And so the quarterback, turned, and rather than handing off to the halfback or the fullback, around came pop from the guard position, and he got the ball, and he claims he got about 20 yards downfield before he lost his balance because he wasn't accustomed to sprinting. But the innovation started early. In other words, so he was already into the trickery by the time he was in college. So,
Very, very interesting. Okay,
yeah.
so he ended up leaving Cornell because he had his degree in law when he graduated, and he
Mhm.
did that for a little bit. You describe in the book, and sort of became disinterested in it. He sort of
Yeah,
had that. He had the bug of football
exactly,
in him.
exactly.
So where did he go from there? With he left the law degree and ended up getting into coaching.
Well, he got contacted by somebody from Cornell who said that the University of Iowa was looking for a coach, and would they mind if they put his name in? And he was more than happy to do so. He was bored being a lawyer. He didn't want to sit in an office. He wanted to be, out there, on the football field. So he accepted that, and at the same time, or right around the same time, um, he applied for a position with the University of Georgia, and he accepted Iowa first. But then he thought, well, I can do that. I can coach at Iowa for a month, and then once I get my system, quote unquote, in place at Iowa, I can just have the captain of the team take over as my coach, and then I can go to Georgia and I can install my system there, and then I can run both teams by telegram. I can run Iowa by telegram, and I can be on the field in Georgia. And so that's what he did. He was running two teams at the same time for the first couple of years.
Man, I'm just jealous of people like that can come up with these dubious schemes to leverage their time to make double the money, and he certainly did. I mean, who would ever think of doing something like that? That's I found that really interesting.
Well, when you look at his history of using tricks and trick plays and skullduggery and deception, it all makes sense. I mean, he always did things like this. He was always thinking, what else can I do? What innovation can work? What misdirection can work? He was constantly, his mind was going a mile a minute constantly.
Now, okay, he had some kind of interesting things happen when he was coaching at Georgia. Would he have like 2 or 3 years, I believe, at Georgia? But he had one of the I guess big plays prior to 1906, before the forward pass was legalized. With we all know that story with Teddy Roosevelt getting involved in everything. But he had sort of a famous play when Georgia played North Carolina in a game, and it sort of the game ended on a play, or was a major factor in a game for Georgia against North Carolina. And I don't know if you know where I'm going with on this story.
Are you talking about the forward pass?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, North Carolina used the forward pass illegally because it had not yet been legalized at that point. And the way the story was told was the pass was actually used as desperation. It wasn't a planned play. Their punter was rushed and went out to the side and just threw the ball down the field. and their receiver caught it. And at this point, I can't remember if he went for a touchdown or whatever it was, but it was a turning point in the game. And Coach Warner was apoplectic at this point. It was illegal. You can't throw the ball. And the referee inexplicably said he didn't see it. I didn't see the play. Well, where were you looking? But he said he didn't see it. So they got away with the forward pass. And Pop was never, he gets a lot of credit for innovation, but he was never an exponent of the forward pass. He never really wanted to use it until he got to Carlisle. And even then, it was grudgingly because he had some players who could throw the ball, but he stored that away, and he thought, well, geez, and so when it was finally legalized in 1906, he was that's when he was out heading towards Carlisle. He was still at Cornell, but he was getting ready to develop the single wing and kind of innovate the whole way the game was played, and the forward pass was part of that. So you can see kind of a lineage between that pass and where he wound up with the single wing, because it was an extension of the single wing being able to fake a handoff and roll out and throw the ball down the field. So
yeah, I think we're going to talk about another time here in a little bit about Pop Warner definitely could capitulate on his stance on certain aspects of the game and turn on dime. Like, he was not a proponent of the forward pass in late 1890s when this occurred, but less than 10 years later, he's practiced it probably more than anybody in those early years. So kind of interesting. But I guess he's still at Georgia. He ended up having a meeting with a head-to-head meeting with another famous coach who you mentioned a little bit earlier, and John Heisman, who is coaching at Auburn, and a couple interesting games that they had in consecutive years of them both coaching those two schools. And if you can maybe mention something about that.
Are you talking about the hunchback play, the hidden ball trick?
Well, yeah, that's part of it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what were you heading?
Let me set you up a little bit better. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So Pop is in I believe his first year at Georgia, and he's telling his team, he knows they have to play Auburn, and he says, maybe we better go scout these guys a little bit. And some of his the people that are down there, some of the people that are helping him with the team, like, hey, we cleaned their clocks last year. You don't need to go check on Auburn because we killed them last year. And so he doesn't scout them, and the results were a little bit less than
Robert, right?
So Heisman had some things ready, because Heisman did come and watch Georgia play one of their games, picked up on a couple things, and ended up being key to victory for Auburn in that year.
And even Pop, going back to what we were talking about earlier, Pop did not like scouting. At first he did not believe in it. He thought, well, you the best team wins. You just get out there, you line up, and you go head to head, you kick their ass, and that's it. You win. Whatever team is a better team is going to win. He didn't think about all that scouting stuff until later on. And then once he got to Carlisle, and he saw that all his players were either small or he didn't have a lot of players there, he had to go out and scouting and looking for players, because it wasn't just about scouting the other team, but he had to go out and scout for other players. But then he also had to scout the other team, because it was at a different level now. He's starting to play teams like Harvard and Princeton and all that. So you can see the lineage, or one thing leads to another, and a change in his belief system.
Yeah, I found that, that's one thing that you really portrayed in the book, and in many instances where Pop sort of got educated on the job, and it changed his philosophy on different things. And that's definitely one of the scouting things. And we'll talk about a few more here in a bit of during his career, but just some great things. But ended up the next year, he played when Georgia and Auburn played. It was a little bit different result. He got a little bit more intel on Auburn, and Heisman play in particular, which we'll talk about in another episode, that ended up Pop got the better of him. So I think they end up splitting their series when they went head to head down there in the southern states. So real interesting. So, okay. So he gets done with Georgia. He's done at I think he still goes on a little bit at Iowa, but where does he go from Georgia? What makes him leads him away from coaching at Georgia?
When he was at Georgia, Cornell came calling, so I think it was more of a chance to go back to his alma mater and coach there. He loved Cornell, and to the day he died, he said that was the one place that he loved the most. I mean, he had 3 stints there, one as a player, twice as a coach. So I think it was really just the allure of being able to go back and coach where he played.
Okay, and I believe they offered him a lot bigger sum of money too than what the
well,
other.
There's that.
But I believe he still coached at Iowa for another year or two.
Yeah.
Did the same thing with Cornell. So hey, I can't get there till later in September, but I
You
guess
got to remember too that Cornell was an Ivy League school, so it was a bigger deal there. So
yes, just some interesting stuff I found that you had on there. Okay, so he has some pretty good success at Cornell, and we know that probably one of his more famous teams is with the Carlisle, and which is down in Pennsylvania. So how does he go from Cornell, his alma mater, who he loves being there, and ends up at a smaller school for Native Americans in Carlisle?
Well, when he was at Carlisle, Cornell. They played Carlisle, and he liked their speed, and he could see that they were good with the misdirection and stuff like that. But, they had to be, because they couldn't compete, head to head with these bigger teams. But what happened at Cornell was, when the last year he was there was an assistant coach, or the captain of the team, who was usually the assistant coach, was lobbying with the officials, to the school officials, to take his job. He wanted to be the head coach. So Pop, I guess this player was pretty popular, and Pop probably figured, well, I'm gonna, it's probably time for me to move on. I'm probably not going to win this battle. He had a pretty good record. He was like 15-5 at that point. But the assistant coach just happened to be a very popular person on campus. So Pop was thinking about Carlisle, and he actually set up a meeting with Captain Pratt, who was the superintendent at Carlisle, and they met. And when they met, they found out Superintendent Pratt, who was a Civil War hero and had started some of the Indian schools, and obviously there's a movement now, to disparage the Indian schools, and rightly so. I'm not defending the Indian schools and their methods, but he was really kind of progressive at the time, because there were people there that believed the only good Indian was a dead Indian. I mean, there was this kind of philosophy in America at the time. So he thought, no, we can educate the Indian and civilize him, which obviously we wouldn't think that way now, but rather than eradicate the red man, he thought, let's save the red man and hopefully civilize him. But anyway, so they met, and Pop realized that they had a lot in common. They both came from small towns in Western New York, and they had both had been tinsmiths. They had both been apprentices as tinsmiths. He had been in the Civil War, and Pop's father had fought in the Civil War. They were both excellent horsemen. There was a lot of things they had in common. So Pop thought this is perfect. So he goes on to Carlisle, and at Carlisle he has a great success with a small team because they're fast. He knows how to utilize their agility, their speed, their love of deception, and they love to, when they could beat a team of white men, they loved it. So they wanted to play for Pop, because Pop knew how to develop a game plan, so to speak. So he had really good success at Carlisle.
Now, I thought it was real interesting. You talked about his early days at Carlisle, and Pop came from the culture of some of the coaches that use profanity and got on a player's case if they messed up, and just very, very strict as a coach. And you
Yes,
tell the tale of how he sort of, again, learned from his environment and what was going on. And maybe if you could share with that with the
sure.
Carlisle players.
Yeah, he was a gruff guy. You didn't do your job. He'd say, "You son of a b, what's the matter with you? Get your butt moved." In more graphic terms. And here we're at the Carlisle school where we're not just trying to civilize the red man, we're trying to Christianize the red man. So we're teaching them to be Christian gentlemen. You don't swear, you're a good sport, all this stuff. And then you get this gruff guy, from Western New York, Texas, Cornell, whatever. And he comes in and he's swearing at them, and he's belittling them, and he's saying things that they don't like. And eventually the players are quitting the team. And he doesn't understand where's Joe? Where's Bob? Why aren't they at practice? Oh, they quit. Why'd they quit? Oh, they don't want to come here and play anymore. So he had to learn. He had to learn the hard way. Like, well, I better cool it if I want to have a team. So he says that he learned his lesson and he no longer spoke that way to the players. Well, I'm sure you don't just change like that, but I think he learned his lesson about how far he could go with some of these players.
So yeah, so that's a big coaching style change where he had been years
Sure.
and years at three different collegiate teams where he was probably acting in that way and changed
Oh,
for
sure.
this group of young men that he was coaching. And
Yeah.
they seems like they responded pretty well to it because they had a pretty decent season
Yeah.
his years at Carlisle. And
Yeah. He I think they ended up liking him. I know that there are accounts of players who didn't, but there are more accounts of players who did like him and who stood by him, as he got older. So I tend to believe that they learned to respect him.
yeah, I found it was really an interesting piece at Carlisle, the pre Jim Thorpe years, where you talked about a game that I didn't really know existed, where Carlisle traveled out to the West Coast and played a holiday
Mhm.
game. And I don't know
Yeah.
if you can talk about that a little bit.
Well, I'll try to remember. I do know that I remember the trip because they took the train. It was the first time they had gone that far, and they would every time the train would stop, they get out and they do signal drills, and they go through calisthenics and things like that. But I'm not sure which game you're referring to, but I do know the one game was when they played at Haskell Indian School, which is out in Oklahoma, I believe. And
Mhm.
one of the players, one of the people that was there was Jim Thorpe. And when the Carlisle Indian players, who were already famous because they had some guys on the team who were all Americans, um, you know, uh, Joseph Seneca and Mount St. Pleasant, I think James Johnson. I can't remember which ones were on the team at the time, but but they were pretty well known, and they were other Native American groups. These guys were superstars. This was you could have had the Kansas City Chiefs or the Boston Celtics walk in. I mean, that's the magnitude that the respect that they had for these people. So when they came in, they made a very good impression on the students there. And so some of them ended up going to Carlisle because of this visit that the team made to that school.
Yeah, you talked about some of the training on the team before you played when they played Haskell. You described how when the train would go uphill, he'd have the players inside the car, sort of running the aisleway of the
Yeah,
train car, so
yeah,
they're getting their workout, going on
yeah.
elevation. I thought that was interesting, and they made a couple stops. So they were going to be playing, I believe it was California, uh, on a Christmas Day game. I believe is maybe
Mhm.
it was either Cal or Stanford. I was pretty sure it was Cal. And so they along the way, there was an older gentleman who knew,
Oh,
who asked about the team a little bit, had a conversation with Pop. Uh, uh,
yeah.
if you want to
And he
go
said,
ahead.
"Good luck," because no team has ever beaten them or something. I can't remember the quote, but good luck because I can't remember the quote now. It's been a while since I wrote it.
It,
I don't know if you have it there, but
no, that's the
it was
basic
like,
gist of it. They were
yeah,
like
no
9
team
and
has
0
ever
or
beaten now. You're going on. It's a long way to go to get your ass kicked or something like that. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And what the outcome of that game ended up being?
They won,
They,
didn't they?
yeah. I think
Yeah,
they
they
beat them
won.
pretty good.
Yeah,
It was like 22-0 or something. They
yeah,
beat
yeah,
Cal,
yeah,
and
yeah.
there was happiness on the train ride home. That's for sure. So
Yeah,
just
that's the one where they had the football that was the was not regulation size, and the field was sand,
mhm.
and it was almost like California didn't know anything about organized football. They were just kind of adopting the game, and they just kind of made things up as they went along. Trying to mimic the game from the east, and they get out there and like the football's the wrong size, and the fields you can't run on sand, and but they still ended up winning.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Another trip with he took with Carlisle I found interesting is when they traveled one year to go play Fielding Yost's Michigan teams, one of his great teams, and they were a little bit banged up. They had some games prior to that. They had some a couple guys as they got to Chicago defected from the team because they thought they was halfway home to back to the
Mm-hmm.
reservation or wherever they were living back where their folks were, and so they defected from the team. So he's real short-handed going into Michigan to play a usually pretty tough Fielding Yost team, and so Pop goes, two legends talking, and Pop goes to, in your book describes to Yost, hey, can we shorten these games a little bit, this game a little bit, these quarters, because my guys are hurting. He had another guy get hurt, I think,
Mm-hmm.
right before the game, wasn't able to play separated shoulder or something. And I thought it was kind of interesting what Yost said to him on that. He basically said, we're not shortening the game. This is a football game, and you're here to play, and
Yeah,
that's your tough luck. And
yeah,
end up, Michigan won kind of handily on that. But
yeah,
another good lesson learned for Pop Warner, which I'm sure he
yeah.
used later on in his career.
But it also tells you something about the competitive nature of these great coaches. I mean, Phil Yost is a legend, and and through the whole book and through his whole career, you see all these great coach. He had a rivalry with Heisman, with Stagg, with Yost, with Rockney, and all these great coaches. And it's kind of neat to see that they respected each other. They even became really close friends with in some cases, but there was this rivalry. They were all they all wanted to be the guy, the coach, the authority, and and many of them were. you know,
Yeah, and he ended up. Another one he had a great rivalry with some of his former players and assistants. He had Jock Sutherland took over for him
yeah,
at Pitt, and he went to Stanford. I think they played a Rose Bowl game against each
yeah,
other.
yeah,
Their teams played, and just some great names. A lot of
mm-hmm.
good name dropping of coaches. These legendary coaches
Yeah,
all playing against Pop Warner and playing each
yeah,
other.
yeah.
I found that fascinating. So great story there. So, now he had a lot of different innovations during his long tenure at coaching at all these places. Maybe you could just touch on some of those what Pop Warner brought into college football.
Sure. Well, the first and most obvious one is a single wing, and that was kind of a you know he was a master of deception, misdirection, and he didn't like the whole um, the mass momentum plays, and they were being outlawed anyways. Okay, Teddy Roosevelt, said you guys really need to clean up the game, and they changed, they made a lot of rule changes, including the line of scrimmage and the board pass and all this stuff. So Warner thought, well, if we can, we're not going to use mass momentum. I don't, I want to use some of the things that I always believed in, like trickery or end arounds, reverses, triple fake handoffs, things like that. So that's where the single wing came in. So it was a T formation up until 1906, and then he developed the single wing, and eventually a single wing becomes the standard formation for every team except Chicago Bears. Okay, but for the next 15 years, it's pretty much the go-to formation. And then he also invented the double wing. So the single wing has one wingman out on the side, usually to the right. With a double wing, you have wingmen on both sides, and it's more versatile. It can run to either way very easily. Where if you run the single wing, whatever side you put the wing on is usually the side you're going to. With a double wing, you don't know. So that again was a big deal. He came up with the hidden ball trick, which stuff the ball up the back of a player's jersey, while everybody's standing in a huddle, so the other side doesn't know who has the ball. Everybody turns around and starts running, and the guy who has the football isn't going to have everybody chasing after him because nobody knows which one has it. And the play worked successfully, and eventually got outlawed. He came up, he was
as
also,
a former official. I'm glad that happened. By the way,
yeah. He came up with he came up with the idea of hardened shoulder pads. They didn't have plastic at the time, and he used fiberglass to give it the rigidity it needed, to provide more protection for the shoulder pads and other pads, in the thighs and things like that. He improved the things like the tackling dummy, and they give him credit for coming up with the spiral punt, which usually when the ball was melon shaped, you just kicked it and it went end over end, and you hoped it bounced and kept going. With the spiral, obviously you wanted to get it so it was more aerodynamic as it passed through the air and got more distance. He was given credit for the 3-point stance, which he adapted from track and field. Prior to 1911, halfbacks and fullbacks in the backfield would start at a 2-point stance, hands on knees, slightly crouched. Pop noticed that in track and field, when runners were starting their sprint, when they started from the 3-point stance, they took off faster than they did from the 2-point stance, because normally in the 2-point stance you take a step back before you take off. In the 3-point stance, you're already down there and you just shoot right off from the gun. So there were several things that he was given credit for. I can't think of anything else right off.
No, that's plenty right there.
Yeah.
Now we know, and you mentioned it earlier, we know that his name is synonymous with youth football. So how did that connection come up? Because you have this gruff guy that you don't really hear him talking. I didn't read anything where he's coaching real young players, except maybe some of the younger Native Americans at Carlisle and that. But he's mostly a collegiate coach, and so
Right.
how does that connection come about?
He was coaching at Temple, and this is later in his career. And so he's in Philadelphia, and there's a little league football circuit, or team, or a league, there's a little league football league. And he was invited to speak at a banquet, like end of the season banquet. And he was invited along with a bunch of other coaches in the area. And, of course, he's the most famous one. He's Pop Warner. And so he's the most famous guy in Philadelphia. But the banquet happens to be on an evening when there's a snowstorm. So none of the other coaches who were supposed to be there show up. The only one who shows up was Pop Warner, and he showed up an hour or so late. So nobody was expecting anybody to be there, and then all of a sudden he walks in. And he walks up onto the stage, and he gives a long talk. They love him. He stays for hours signing autographs, talking to the kids and the dads, and they just love him. And people can't get enough of this, so they're talking about it for days. And the powers that be of this league said, you know what, this guy, he's local, he's great, the people love him, look what he did for these kids. Why don't we ask him to be our representative, or at least endorse us? So they asked him, and they said, we want to use your name, on our league. And he gave them his consent. He never coached a little league team. He never really had any connection to this league or any leagues at all. He just loaned his name. And to this day, that was 1930 something, and 37, I believe. And to this day, 90 years later, whatever it is, he's, the little leagues are still called Pop Warner leagues. And even if, they have cheerleaders that are Pop Warner cheerleaders. So, and sometimes it's derisive. Sometimes, when you're using a simple offense in the pros, if they do something simple, or they'll say, oh, they're just running a Pop Warner offense. Well, they don't realize it's actually kind of a misnomer, because you might be thinking that you're using it derogatorily towards, little leagues, but you don't know how innovative Pop Warner really was. You know? So if you say you're running a Pop Warner offense, you're not really, it's not really an insult.
Right, right. It's the tip of innovation at the
Yeah.
time. But Jeff, this has been a great talk. I'm going to give you the opportunity to tell where people can get your book. And I apologize, we haven't said the name of the book yet, but we want to really get this out there. This is April 5th that we're airing this on, and it is the birth date of Pop Warner. And so that's why we thought it was kind of special that we get together and get this recorded. So I apologize. So let's take time. Let's give the title of your book and where folks can get a copy of it at.
Yeah, it's called Pop Warner: A Life on the Gridiron, and you can get it on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes and Noble online. Here in Western New York, you can get it at Barnes and Noble bookstores and local books. Like here in Springville, there's a couple of sites, the Pop Warner Museum, where you can buy it and stuff like that. But if for those people listening across the country, Amazon, if you're interested, you can get it on Amazon, or you can go to the McFarland Press website. McFarland is the publisher. They did a fantastic job of putting it together for me. So it's pretty easy to get if you want to find it.
Okay. Jeff Miller, we appreciate you coming on here talking about your book and this legend of the game, Pop Warner, and really appreciate you, sir, and for sharing this great man with us.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's a lot of fun. I always have fun talking about Pop. So thanks.